At 5:30 a.m. on August 29, 2005, a lone surfer named Jason Morgan eased his board into the murky waters of New Orleans Industrial Canal. He was chasing a swell that locals swore was the perfect break, a wave that could rise out of the canal's still surface on a windless morning. Half a football field away downstream, a floodwall had just split open like a torn seam, a gaping hole in the concrete swallowing the night. Jason never saw it coming. He never heard the distant growl of the storm already chewing up the Gulf. What happened when the water under his board just disappeared? And why did the wall that was supposed to hold back the surge fail like that? The camera plunges below, the surfboard drifting over a riverbed littered with rusted rebar and tangled marsh grass. Everything's muffled, the world a quiet, icy blue. Above the canal, the sky lets out a low, rumbling growl thunder, but Jason doesn't even flinch. A faint crackle from a 2005 emergency broadcast cuts through the static on a nearby radio. Engineers flagged weak soil under Sector 3D, catastrophic failure risk if. Jason tugs his wetsuit tighter, the neoprene sticking to his shoulders as the wind whips salty spray across his face. He turns to see his friend Lucy Chen holding a camcorder, her eyes wide with the kind of excitement that comes before something goes viral. Industrial Canal, August 29, 2005, 5:30 a.m. Jason's board tilts. In one heartbeat, the water flips like a flipped coin, a sudden surge lifts one side of the canal while the other side drops. Below, a massive concrete slab shudders, then peels away, sliding on ground that couldn't hold its own weight. The crack widens, a jagged maw swallowing the canal's calm. Lucy's camcorder locks onto the moment the wall lets out a groan, a sound like a dying animal mixed with the thunder rumbling in the distance. The 15-foot floodwall, built to tame the Mississippi's rage, bends and snaps. Brown water barrels in, a 10-foot wall of current that slams into the small boat Jason's clinging to. A tight shot of the floodwall's face shows water seeping through hairline cracks, the concrete darkening where the dirt below has turned to mush. Jason's pulse hammers as the surge lifts his board, then drops it like a rag doll. He fights to stay upright, muscles screaming against the pull of the raging water. The canal, once a playground for thrill-seekers, has turned into a death trap. Lucy's voice cuts through the camcorder's speaker, sharp and panicked. "Jason, get out," but the water's already swallowed the spot where his board was. The thunder rolls louder, mixing with the flood's roar and the desperate yells of neighbors scrambling for higher ground. The scene locks on one frame. The water's surface, a shattered mirror reflecting the broken wall and the silhouette of a surfer caught in the current's grip. That morning's events weren't just a tragedy for two young surfers. They were a crack in the city's armor, a flaw in a system built to protect thousands. And it all came down to dirt. Credibility note: our digging pulls from the New York Times, a GAO deep dive, and Scientific American's breakdown of the levee's design flaws. Turns out the floodwall sat on soil that was basically a wet sponge. Engineers later found the dirt couldn't handle the weight when Katrina's surge hit source. New York Times. Water seeped underneath, eating away at the foundation until the whole thing gave way. Engineers later found that the floodwalls, built on top of weak, waterlogged soil, failed because the soil couldn't support the wall's weight. The system was only built for a Category 3 hurricane, but Katrina came in as a full-blown Category 5, a mismatch that turned every weak spot into a wound. Source: PBS Frontline. A graphic slices through the canal's cross-section, highlighting the soggy clay layer under the floodwall labeled Sector 3D, weak soil. The Army Corps of Engineers later admitted to design blunders and shoddy construction, wrong soil numbers, miscalculations, you name it. Source: GAO report. Old footage shows engineers in hard hats picking through the wreckage, floodlights casting long shadows as the water laps at their boots. Scientists pointed to a fatal flaw: The levee wasn't deep enough. Water just slipped underneath like it wasn't even there, a mistake that could have been caught with better soil tests. Source: Scientific American. The failure of the 17th Street Canal levee was due to a design defect. The levee wasn't deep enough to stop water from sneaking underneath. Locals in the Industrial Canal had been yelling about this for years, too. Surfers knew that wave they chased was often a sneaky undertow, a hidden pull that could yank a paddler under without warning. Source: Nolacom. The radio's emergency chatter crackles on, static cutting through the words. Catastrophic failure risk if the soil gives way. Jason's board, now drifting among the debris, became a brutal symbol of the bigger disaster. As the water roared forward, it carried broken concrete and something worse: the city's belief that its walls were unbreakable. Lucy kept filming, and her footage, later blasted across every major news outlet, would become the face of the storm's fury. The clip shows the wall collapsing, a crowd watching from a safe distance, their faces frozen between horror and disbelief. The Industrial Canal breach wasn't the only one. All over New Orleans, levees crumbled under the same pressure, each failure rooted in that same soggy soil that had been flagged but ignored. A map of the city lights up, every failed sector blinking red, the Industrial Canal glowing brighter than the rest. The aftermath: a city underwater, families scattered, and a harsh truth: the city's last line of defense had been built on ground that couldn't hold. The thunder fades, replaced by the endless hiss of pumps fighting a losing battle. For Jason and Lucy, that morning wasn't just another day. Jason's board washed up weeks later, scarred by the flood's fury, a reminder that chasing the perfect wave can turn into a fight for air. Lucy's footage, though, became part of the push that forced changes in how flood protection gets designed. A modern shot of the rebuilt wall stands tall, reinforced with deeper pilings and real-time sensors, a lesson carved into concrete, even if the memory still lingers in the water's edge. One question hangs in the air: what if someone had listened to the warnings about that weak soil before Katrina hit? Would Jason's board have stayed afloat? Would the wall have held? Would the city have been spared? Stay with us as we follow the engineering mistakes, the human cost, and the scars that still shape New Orleans today. A slow, grainy crane shot glides over the Industrial Canal. Graffiti mars the concrete floodwall, and rust gnaws at the seams. The lens hangs on a dark puddle that never quite dries. 12 years on, the tale still lies half buried in mud. Dr. Ellen Voss, a geotechnical engineer clutching a weather-worn notebook, kneels amid the sludge. She lifts a trowel, scrapes a clump of earth, and holds it up to the gray sky. "This isn't clay. It's Claytonite 3, she says, voice low, while distant traffic hums behind her. "And it's supposed to be clay." The words Claytonite 3 flash on screen, the letters trembling like a wavering tide. Cut to 2003. A cramped conference room at the Army Corps of Engineers. Fluorescent lights buzz overhead. A junior engineer, Mark Thompson, slides a blueprint across the table, his finger tracing a red line that cuts through Sector 3D. "Sector 3D's soil report says weak soil," he announces, eyes glued to the data. Claytonite 3 is notorious for liquefaction under stress. The camera pushes in on the word liquefaction, the letters melting into a ripple effect. Across the room, senior engineer Gene Ryan leans back, a half-smile playing on his lips. "It's approved," he replies, voice casual, as if the term were a stamp of safety. "We'll build the wall and the water will stay out." The scene snaps back to today, the drone humming over the scarred canal. The floodwall is cracked, water seeping through the seams like a slow bleed. Voss flips the trowel over again, letting the soil slip through her fingers. "The engineers thought they were dealing with clay," she whispers, "but they were working with a material that behaves like quicksand when the pressure spikes." A graphic pops up: Claytonite 3, a fine-grained, water-saturated silt with low shear strength. The first clue came from a New York Times investigation after Katrina. Reporters traced the failure of the floodwalls to weak, waterlogged soil that could not support the wall's weight, allowing water to seep underneath. Source: the article never named the soil, but the description matches the behavior of Claytonite 3. A map of the canal flashes, layers of soil data overlaid on the floodwall's footprint. A PBS Frontline documentary later confirmed that the levee system was engineered for a Category 3 storm, yet Katrina hit as a Category 5 source. The mismatch between design assumptions and reality exposed critical flaws in the engineering assumptions, the very assumptions that dismissed the true nature of the ground beneath. The camera zooms on the phrase engineering assumptions, which then shatters like glass. The Government Accountability Office's 2006 report added a stark line. The Corps identified design errors and construction flaws, including the use of incorrect soil strength parameters. Source: that line is the bureaucratic echo of Jean Ryan's casual approved comment. In the lab, Voss runs a simple test. She drops a steel ball onto a sample of Claytonite 3. It sinks, then bursts upward as water erupts from the grain matrix. When you load it, the particles lose contact, she explains. The soil essentially liquefies. A wall that sits on that foundation can't bear its own weight, let alone a storm surge. Scientific American's peer-reviewed analysis of the 17th Street Canal failure described a design defect, the levee not being deep enough to prevent water from flowing underneath. Source: the defect was not just a matter of depth. It was a matter of mischaracterizing the soil's bearing capacity. A side-by-side comparison, a cross-section of a properly engineered levee versus the industrial canal wall. The latter sits on a thin slab of Claytonite 3, the water table perched just centimeters below the surface. The mislabeling of Claytonite 3 as clay was not a simple clerical error. It was a strategic omission. In internal memos, engineers noted that the material's liquefaction potential would trigger a more costly design: deeper pilings, reinforced concrete, and a longer construction timeline. By classifying it as ordinary clay, the project stayed within budget, and the urgency of the post-Katrina reconstruction kept scrutiny at bay. A redacted email surfaces: Claytonite 3 treat as standard clay for cost saving. Fast forward to the present, where a different crowd rides the same waterway. Surfers gather at dawn, boards tucked under arms, eyes scanning the horizon for the next wave. A local news clip rolls. Surfers in the Industrial Canal report that the wave they chase is often a dangerous undercurrent. Source: one of them, a lanky rider named Jace, laughs as the camera catches his splash. "It's just the river," he says. "The water's always moving. We've been here forever." The camera zooms on the word forever, which then fades into the rusted floodwall. The denial is palpable. The same community that feels the pull of the current also feels the pull of an old story, a story that tells them the water is just water, not a reminder of a failed wall built on false premises. Voss watches the surfers from a distance, the mud still clinging to her boots. She knows the truth lies beneath the surface, where the soil's weakness still whispers. "They're chasing a wave that never existed," she mutters, "because the wave was supposed to be held back." A drone sweeps over the canal at sunset, the floodwall casting a long shadow that meets the water's edge. The narrative of the Industrial Canal is a layered one. Engineering reports that downplayed a volatile soil, a hurricane that forced the hidden flaw into the open, and a present-day culture that rides the remnants without seeing the cause. Text appears. When the ground is mischaracterized, the structure above becomes a ticking time bomb. The investigation continues. Voss returns to the lab, pulls the archived soil report, and runs a finite element model. The simulation shows the wall's base shifting by centimeters under a simulated surge, enough to open a path for water. The model's animation freezes on the point of failure, a red line tracing the breach. Claytonite 3 was the Achilles heel, Voss concludes, and the core paperwork turned a known weakness into a myth. The screen fades to black, the faint sound of a typewriter clacking in the background, each keystroke echoing the unfinished story of a floodwall that never lived up to its promise. Ellen hovers her fingertip above the power button and the screen flickers awake. Across the monitor, the opening line of a 2004 email thread blazes. "I can't sign off on this. The soil tests are falsified." Source: GAO. Jean's reply comes next, short and icy. "Then you'll be reassigned." Source: GAO. It's just one thread, yet it bears the heft of a concealed catastrophe. A separate memo logged Mark Thompson's last known spot, a ramshackle motel by the Industrial Canal, but that note never left the file. No body was ever found. The motel room sits empty and the paperwork stays sealed. Next to a canal map, the emails rest, the floodwall sketched in a thin blue line. Later, engineers found the wall sat on water-logged, feeble soil that couldn't support its weight, letting water seep beneath the structure's source. NY Times. That same flaw showed up in a 2002 geotechnical survey, yet the data were brushed aside or tweaked to fit budget limits. Engineers weren't shocked. They'd warned about a design defect that left the levee too shallow to block water flowing underneath. Source: Scientific American. Across town, Lucy's surf shop hums with a jukebox's low drone and the clatter of beer bottles. Darius Johnson, a 30-year-old local, slams his fist on the counter, eyes flashing. "Dock's full of shit. The waves are magic here. Why fix what ain't broke?" he says, laughing, though his chuckle barely hides a deeper unease. Ellen's voice crackles on the phone, urgent and hushed. "Darius, the wall broke. Jason didn't drown, he was swept into the breach." Source: NOLA. Those words sink into the din, stark against the shop's carefree chatter. Patrons at the surf shop sip their drinks, oblivious to the undercurrent now roiling beneath. Their magic waves actually stem from a breach that let the canal's surge flood the streets, turning the neighborhood into a shallow, turbulent river. Surfers have long said the wave they chase often hides a dangerous undercurrent. Source: NOLA. They chase the thrill, unaware that the water's source is a failure born of falsified data and ignored warnings. Each keystroke on Ellen's laptop syncs with a faint heartbeat, reminding us that truth still lives, beating against the silence after Mark's disappearance. That same heartbeat thunders in the surf shop's background, a pulse no cheap beer or bravado can drown. Mark's email, a lone line of dissent, ended up as the final written record of a system built on compromised soil. The floodwall didn't collapse by accident. It was the inevitable outcome of a design resting on a foundation of lies. Source: GAO. What once promised protection now unravels into a tale of omission. The Corps had flagged design errors and construction flaws, including the use of wrong soil strength parameters. Source: GAO. Had those parameters been accurate, they would have called for a deeper, sturdier levee, one capable of withstanding a Category 5 surge. Source: PBS. Instead, they built the levee to a Category 3 spec, a miscalculation that left the whole community exposed to a flood that, in hindsight, was inevitable. Source: PBS. Mark's whistleblowing, captured in that terse exchange with Jean, was the first crack in the wall of secrecy. When he vanished, the email thread was archived, the motel room emptied, and the floodwall stood unstable, waiting. The community gathering at Lucy's shop now celebrates a wave that, in truth, is a symptom of that instability. Their ignorance doesn't stem from indifference but from a systematic erasure that started with a falsified soil test. Ellen's screen now displays the thread's final line: "I'm going to expose this." The cursor blinks, a digital pulse echoing that earlier heartbeat. She knows that exposing the truth won't bring Mark back, but it will shine a light on the chain of choices that caused the wall's failure, the breach, and the lives swept away. The surf shop's laughter fades as the breach's reality settles over the room, a silent tide no bravado can push back. The story hits a fulcrum, a silenced whistleblower, a wall that never stood, and a generation riding the resulting wave unaware of its source. The revelation isn't just about a flood wall. It's about the cost of ignoring data, the danger of reassignment threats, and the human toll hidden beneath a veneer of magic surf. The heartbeat slows, syncing with the final keystroke that sends Ellen's report to a national outlet, a small act that might finally shift the tide of denial. In the split screen, Ellen's laptop glows as the email thread scrolls, while Darius's fist still hangs in the air, surf shop lights flickering above a tide that's already turned. The audience is left with the echo of a heart, the rhythm of a keystroke, and the knowledge that the floodwall's promise never materialized. The truth, now surfacing, threatens to reshape the story of a community that's been riding on a lie far too long. Source: Scientific American. The drone's shadow glides over the jagged tear in the earth, water welling up through the split ground like a candle guttering in slow motion. Ellen's voice cracks over the howling wind, all gravel and fury. They knew. They all knew, and they let it happen twice. The shot holds tight on the soggy dirt, the same waterlogged mess engineers would later point to as the reason the floodwall never stood a chance. The soil too weak to anchor the barrier against the rising water. Source: New York Times. That wasn't some last-minute surprise, turns out. The U.S. Army Corps of Engineers copped to using the wrong numbers for soil strength, a boneheaded mistake that left the walls teetering on a foundation that couldn't handle the load. Source: GAO. Then whoosh, the camera swings to Lucy's leash, floating limp in the murky soup of the industrial canal. It's like the water's holding its breath, waiting. Locals who ride these currents have been yelling about the wave they chase, but really, it's just a sneaky undercurrent most folks ignore while the city acts like the water's just there for fun. Source: NOLA. Meanwhile, a news ticker crawls at the bottom. City Council to vote on floodwall repairs next month. The levee system was supposed to handle a Category 3 storm, but Katrina barreled in as a 5, and suddenly the gap between what engineers thought would happen and what actually happened yawned wide open. Source: PBS. The 17th Street Canal levee. It gave way because it wasn't deep enough to stop the water from sneaking underneath, a problem that could have been fixed if someone had bothered to check the dirt data. Source: Scientific American. Down in New Orleans, the ground keeps giving way, its grip on the city loosening with every high tide and storm surge that slithers through the cracks. The floodwall, once sold as the big fix, now looks like a house of cards, and the folks riding those waves, they're part of the quiet that lets this mess keep rotting. Ellen's face slams onto the screen, rain streaking her cheeks, her gaze locked on the horizon where another storm is brewing. This isn't some old wound, it's today. The dirt under this city, it's rotting. The next hurricane, it's coming. So what's your play? The screen bleeds to black, and then bam, white text slams onto the screen. Donate to Engineers for Ethical Intervention. The denial isn't some ghost from the past. It's a living, breathing thing, pulsing with every tide that laps at the city's feet. Those cracks in the floodwall, they're proof that when you build on shaky ground, everything topples eventually. Do nothing and the next storm's gonna take the same route, and the silence, it'll swallow us whole. So make a call. Back independent engineering checks, bankroll soil research, and lift up the voices that spot the danger before it hits. Your move, own it.